Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Glenn Morey. Welcome to the show, Glenn. Looking forward to our conversation this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you for your invitation.
Yeah. So Glenn is an adoptee. He's a transracial adoptee. He's also a filmmaker, and he's got a big project with fellow South Korean adoptees called Side by Side. And when we spoke last time, Glenn, you said that had been a huge learning curve for you over the last 10 years. You'd learned a huge amount from the conversations that you'd had with fellow adoptees, right?
Well, I think that's really true. So much of our understanding of the world around us is just through our own eyeballs and our own experiences, and so we don't really get that much outside of that normally. So when Julie and I, when we first started working on Side by Side, we had no real idea where it was headed or how much the project would grow in scope. We were simply operating on the belief that hearing other people's stories is powerful. That stories are how we come to care about and empathize with our fellow human beings, and that stories are how we make sense out of our lives. So since the mid-50s, some 200,000 infants and children have been adopted out of South Korea, which is 70 years of intercountry adoption. So to even begin to understand something that big requires many stories. So that's what we wanted to do. And we ultimately filmed 100 stories of adopted and aged out Koreans born between 1944 and 1995. And with every conceivable circumstance and outcome. We filmed all over the world, 100 stories, and in this process, we were able to create this oral history of Korean and intercountry adoptees. And you can watch all 100 full interviews at sidebysideproject.com. You can also watch 10 thematic short films on the website as well. And there'll be you'll find links to our New York Times OpDoc and our audiobook available on Audible.
Yeah, wow. So taking you back to this start of that segment, you talked about different eyeballs, right? We see stuff through our own eyeballs, and what you've clearly done through the conversations is you've seen the world through 100 different sets of eyeballs.
Yeah, so the real question, I guess, that a lot of people have when it comes to those eyeballs is, where'd they come from? How did we find them? How did we pick them? And the truth is that they found and picked us. I put out announcements on social media. I told people what we were trying to do, and adoptees all over the world got in touch with me. And I then had a phone conversation with most of them. Of course, we couldn't go everywhere, so we looked at the cities where we had the most responses, and that's where we went. And within those cities, we filmed everyone who wanted to tell their story. We didn't say no to anyone, and we didn't edit anyone out. We filmed 100 stories, and there are 100 stories at sidebysideproject.com.
Yeah. So from all those conversations, how would you sum up what you learned in terms of what helps us heal, or what helps those particular South Korean adoptees heal? What was it that you picked up from them on that?
Well, I think that what people tell you begins with what you ask them. And I think that before I talk about what people told me, I think it's important to know that in these interviews, I didn't ask any questions. I wanted people to tell their stories in the way that they wanted to tell them, only including what they thought was important. So I didn't ask any questions. A couple of weeks before the filming, I I framed the interview this way. I asked them to tell me about themselves as Korean adoptees in a roughly chronological way, starting with their earliest memories or information, through their adoption, growing up in their adoptive family, their adoptive country, through their adulthood to the time of filming. And I said they'd have an hour. We would stop for breaks or do-overs or whatever, but that the hour was theirs. And so I think that's important. I think that in this way, we could experience their story the way they wanted to tell it, uninfluenced by anyone else, revealing in many cases their experiences and feelings for the first time, sometimes remembering things as they told their story, or connecting dots they'd never connected before. I actually did ask one question in most of the interviews when they were done. Sometimes even after the camera was off, I asked them how much of what they had just told me had they told to other people, their families, their friends, their partners, and most of them said very little. Even to their partners, they had told very little of this. And so I think that once you have an opportunity to listen to some of these stories, or many of these stories, what you come to understand is that with nearly everyone I talked to, I found a surprising amount of pain associated with their adoption experiences. So it didn't matter if they were struggling with all kinds of life challenges, or if they were highly accomplished with beautiful families and wonderful lives. Eventually, they talked about their adoption experiences in painful terms, painful memories, painful feelings that clearly had not diminished much over time. So these stories really are about how pain turns into resilience. And these stories are about that journey, and every journey is uniquely different. But that is a very that's a very common arc in these stories. Now, not all of these stories, not even close to all of these stories, turn out well. And so, when you talk about thriving, and I think thriving is an interesting term, because thriving can refer to so many different things. It could refer in many of the conversations that we have as adoptees as part of an inner journey, right? An inner journey that is about identity and healing and coping with and processing trauma and loss. But thriving also can be discussed as a far more physical and tangible state. We could be talking about adults who are safe and housed and healthy physically and mentally. We can be talking about adoptees who have a life and a household that's reasonably stable, with love and support of family and friends. They're educated, they're well integrated into society, they're employed, and they're financially secure. Or we could be talking about adoptees who have none of those things. And both ends of those outcomes are represented in side by side and everything in between.
Yeah. So you said it was a surprising amount of pain. Was that because you have felt less pain yourself than you witnessed in others, or is there some other reason that it was surprising to you?
I think that it was surprising for me, not because I had not experienced pain, but because I had compartmentalized it as successfully as I had. And so essentially what I was able to do through these stories was begin to acknowledge and process and talk about and normalize the experiences that I've had as an adoptee, that many other adoptees have had, to the extent where I can talk about that pain today, even as I continue to process it.
So you'd compartmentalizing it. You're also talking about keeping a lid on it. Really, are you keeping it at bay, keeping the pain at bay? How do you mean, Glenn?
Well, I think, you know, as a child, I became painfully aware that I was different, obviously, and I was transracially adopted into a white family in suburban America, and I was different from those in my family and those in my community in ways that I became aware that the people around me didn't particularly like. So or at least didn't prefer. So over time, I decided to live in a way that had nothing to do with being Korean or being adopted. I would not acknowledge or discuss those things. And I built an identity, a life, on a career and relationships that were willing to ignore those things along with me. So by the time I was 40, I'd managed to live in a way that never required or even allowed the acknowledgement of my race or my origins in particular. You could say I was thriving-ish. It certainly looked like I was thriving, but I really wasn't.
So was there a moment when you became aware of this?
Well, at the age of 40, I had this life-altering experience that was part of a series of experiences, but one in particular, I met a mother and daughter who talked about their immigration from the Philippines to Iowa. And they talked about it in very candid and explicit terms. I heard my own experiences in their story. I knew then that being Korean, adopted into a homogeneously white family and community, that is what I am. And those intrinsic truths that I came away with from those experiences have informed the entire course of my life. And this newly found identity has since begun to permeate every aspect of my life and my heart and my work and my relationships. And this is the identity I have today. And yeah, this identity has issues too. And it continues to grow and evolve, two steps forward, one step back. But I like this identity the most. This is my version of actually thriving.
Yeah. So it's very, for yourself, it's been very much an inner journey. You distinguish between the out thriving. You said it's inner. It can be an inner journey, or it's a physically manifested, more like an external journey. It's been a bit more internal for you, is it?
I think that it has been internal, but what it's done is it's made its way into the world. And in the way that I present myself and talk about myself, and in the way I allow other people to talk to me and ask me about things and so forth. I mean, I think that I have friends who I've known for a lifetime who would tell you that I am nothing like the person I used to be, that my level of guardedness and my level of defensiveness and unwillingness to acknowledge real and intrinsic aspects of me, that's been changed completely.
Yeah. So the change within is very evident. Without, it's very evident outside to people that you meet, but also in terms of your you're doing this project, for example, that's being driven by change within. If you were being guarded and more insular, you wouldn't have started this project, would you?
Well, there's probably been more change since we started working on the project in my life than there was in the years before that. In other words, yes, when I started interacting with the adoptee community, the Korean adoptee community in particular, I went through a fair amount of interchange, and I dealt with a lot of things, but working on this project has been a far greater, longer, and more fulfilling journey since that time than prior.
Yeah. So you're describing an embracing of the full part of your identity, right? That's what it seems like to me. Is that how you see healing, or is healing different to that?
Well, it has been for me. I think everybody has a version of healing, depending on their circumstances and where they are in their life. And I think that healing is an ongoing process. It's not an objective or a goal. It's a lifetime. And so I think at this point, I really am a lucky person, a really fortunate person. And I'm kind of amazed that, the random chaos of the universe has brought me to this place where I actually am authentic and happy in my life. And I want all of that to have purpose. So in this chapter of my life, that's what I want. I want to contribute to our community as adoptees. I want that community to be as big and active, as inclusive as possible. I want to help reach adoptees who are isolated and alienated, and I want to help make the world a better place for adopted children. So, I suppose all of this, sounds kind of over the top, but for me, there's something about being at this stage of life that, and I'm 63 years old now, that has required me to think about the big picture.
Yeah. It doesn't sound silly at all to me, Glenn. It echoes much of my stuff and my philosophy on why I do what I do and why I spend all this time and energy and effort in the podcast, right? So I will ask far more structured questions. You're giving adoptees that blank canvas to share the story. I'm focusing on thriving or healing or both, and doing it in a more structured way. Clearly, I'm only doing it for audio. You're doing you're doing it for video. But the roots of why we're trying to do, why we do what we do, I think are probably quite similar. We've learned some stuff, and it's helped us, and we want to help others, I think.
Well, I think that that meeting adoptees where they are in terms of their experiences and their feelings and their needs in terms of processing and healing on their way to thriving, hopefully, I think that you end up dealing with some of the most difficult and challenging issues and feelings that adoptees might have. And so, so many of my conversations with adoptees and so much of these stories that have been told to me have centered around loss and trauma, but this group of adoptees, being most of them transracial adoptees, there's also this subject of racial identity. You know, for most adoptees, being bullied as children, even as adults, for being racially different, you know, was and is traumatizing. And the vast majority of people that we talked to talked about experiences with racism when they were growing up, you know, taunting, bullying, physical violence experienced with other kids, adults, and even adults in positions of authority. But you know, the part that was really troubling, I think, was throughout growing up, they experienced this day-to-day denigration and shaming about who they were and what they looked like without much help from loved ones. And I kind of thought that would have just been me. Again, we think about the world in terms of how we've experienced it and how we've watched it through our own eyes. But clearly this was not the case. This was not rare or unusual in any way. So when these adoptees have tried to talk about it with their parents, they were told to ignore it, you know, to brush it off, which led to this feeling of disconnection between adoptee and parents, and that this was not a subject that they should bring up or talk about. So we were embarrassed, we were shamed, and we learned to bury it. We learned to hide our shame and our anger. And so growing up, we didn't talk about this with siblings, even other siblings who were adopted, potentially from Korea. We didn't talk about it with them. We didn't talk about it with friends. We didn't talk about it with spouses and partners, even to this day. And in fact, you know, many, as I said, of the storytellers in Side by Side have never spoken of these experiences and feelings until they talked with us for Side by Side. So I think that's really been, I think, some of the most important aspects of the Side by Side project were the ability somehow of the project to allow these most difficult and challenging feelings of shame and anger and fear and alienation and you know, these really hard things to come to the surface in a conversation. And to be able to do that, I think, in the course of a few minutes of watching you know, a filmed story like a Side by Side story is, in my mind, it's absolutely incredible and completely to the credit of the people who came forward to participate in the project.
Yeah. We have, you know, you mentioned you've used the word identity a couple of times. We've talked about the different races and the transracial element of adoption for you and the people that came forward for the film. I've heard this. I've heard it. I've heard the internal struggle. You know, I don't look like other people around me. I don't look like my family, and I don't look like the community I've lived in. I've not heard the same extent to the same extent the bullying side. People have told me a lot about racism, and I guess racism looks, when you're a kid, bullying looks like racism, and racism looks like bullying. And if you're from if you're different to the community in which you're growing up. I happen to have done a lot of work in primary schools and elementary schools in the US as well, and bullying seems to be the most, whether it's about racism or whatever it's about, it seems to be one of the most pernicious, one of the most damaging things, most widespreadly, damaging things that happens to kids. And it's pretty much always based on difference. And so the race card is clearly a very different, it is a key differentiator. But as a white kid in a white environment, I got bullied on scout camp simply because I went to a different school, and because I had buck teeth, I had teeth that stuck out. Kids make everything about us. Bullies, aggressors in this thing, they make it about us and what makes us different. And everybody seems to be wanting to sweep the bullying stuff under the carpet, and they haven't got an answer for it, whether they are parents or whether they are school administrators. There doesn't seem to be a lot that people can actually do, right? And it all adds to that sense of isolation and aloneness and shame. And I think for me, it becomes something that magnifies other trauma. I've seen some stats on this, and this isn't transracial. There's no transracial element to this piece of research, but adoptees are more likely to be bullied than non-adoptees. It seems to be a bit of a trend, whether they sense that we're not as engaged with the rest of the kids in the class or school, or whether we seem weak to them somehow and therefore we get picked on. Who knows? But it seems to be, the bullying of adoptees seems to be quite a prevalent thing.
Well, I'm not certainly an expert on child psychology or anything like that. What I know through conversations and stories that I've heard from other adoptees on this subject. And, here's what I do think I know at this point, which is that, many, if not most, families of color have conversations about race and racism. They talk about racist experiences. They talk about the feelings they create. They talk about how to deal with them. They talk about the fact that racism is real. They talk about how to be out in the world, and a racist world, and how to succeed in that world, how to be safe in that world. But our families that were formed out of transracial adoption, our families don't often have those conversations, if ever. When I was very young, I wish my parents had really listened to me when I told them about my first experience with racist taunting and bullying. I wish they'd asked me how it made me feel. I wish they had acknowledged that those feelings were natural, that I should tell them that these things happened, and that they were on my side and were hurt for me and with me. I wish that I hadn't felt like this was simply my own, shameful burden to hide and to bear. I wish that I hadn't taken that shame and that anger and buried it so deeply that I would even deny it to myself. Last couple of years, it's been really difficult for me at times to support Stop Asian Hate. And it's because I never talk about my own experiences with racism. I never respond to it when it happens to me. I just ignore it. And so the events of the last couple of years have really shaken me. I've struggled very deeply with sadness and anger about this, and as a transracially adopted Asian American, I sometimes struggle to even feel Asian American, because I know so little about Korea, and I don't speak Korean. I don't have family in Korea. I don't live in a community of Asianness. My family is white. Our community is almost homogeneously white. But I am an Asian American, and I have to be able to claim my place in the Asian American community, and I have to feel entitled. I need to be able to feel entitled to share in the fear and the grief and the anger of our community as it experiences some of the things that's been going through over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I hear you. You talked earlier on about a shift from pain to resilience. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Well, that's the lifelong journey, right? Because I don't have a sense that the pain goes away, that the pain is not vivid anymore. What I have the sense from the stories of Side by Side, it's my sense that it's how that pain is processed, how that pain is shared, how that pain is normalized by hearing the stories of other adoptees and how they've come through that. How ultimately that pain is seen as a source of strength, to be themselves and to be honest about themselves and to live a life that fully embraces all of that pain that they've learned to live with in some way and to carry in some way in order to be resilient, healthy, prosperous human beings. And I think that's the human journey. That is our struggle as human beings, is to take all of these things that we accumulate over the course of our lives, even the heaviest and most painful things, and learn to use those things to become fuller and more complete human beings.
Yeah.
So that's the story I see in Side by Side. That's what many of these stories talk about in terms of where they're trying to get in life, but that's also where those adoptees who continue to struggle, who are in the midst of some of the worst and most traumatizing struggles you could possibly imagine, it is what they aspire to.
Yeah. Did any of them talk about the pain lessening?
Only in the sense of acceptance of that pain, but no, I don't think anybody really spoke about pain becoming less of a thing. It's and I think that's what I was trying to say a little earlier, is that it really didn't matter who we were talking to. People who seemingly were entirely removed from all of these sources of pain in their lives. At some point in the interview, they talked about those things in very emotional terms, in terms that made it clear that those feelings were as present now as they've ever been.
Yeah. So was the sense then that rather than the pain lessening, it was fought against less? Do you see what I mean? So people were more accepting of the pain. People, but you talked about coming to terms with it. You talked about processing it. Is that you're saying that it is more about not being so traumatized about being traumatized?
Well, I think trauma is a way that pain manifests itself. So pain is more of a intrinsic to the experiences that we've had in life, and so the question is how do we deal with that? And you know, I'm not an expert in these matters, and I know I have lots of people in my life who are experts in these matters in terms of mental health and adoption and transracial adoption in particular. Um, but I think a big part of this is coming to a sense and an understanding that you are not alone in the world in terms of experiencing those experiences and feeling those feelings. Uh, so you know, a word that people use for this is normalizing. Um, and I think that that's kind of a clinical term for just understanding that you're not alone in that, and that many other people have experienced the same things, and they can talk about those feelings in such a way that helps you, and that helps you feel less alone and less traumatized by those feelings.
Yeah. So I think it's a key part of it's that normalization piece is key, because there's a relief in finding out that other people feel the way that we feel.
Well, and you know, there's a very tangible part of finding out that I think is really important, and that is that when you hear other people tell their stories, it gives you language and ideas and concepts that you didn't have in your brain before that. You know, when I first started interacting with the adoptee community, I didn't know the word adoptee. Okay. I mean, nobody says the word adoptee outside of this little community, right? Everybody talks about being adopted or whatever. And so there's a whole language that has grown up around this community. And largely speaking, I think it's a language that's been very helpful in terms of having real and deep discussions about what we've experienced and what we're working to process and reconcile ourselves with. So that language and those ideas have become very critical in all of this, and in all of our journeys. I think it certainly has been critical in mine. I mean, when I first came into the community, I did not have the ability to have any sort of inner dialogue about any of this, you know, a dialogue for myself. So and only after the course of the last 20 plus years have I become able to talk about this in any depth or fluency. And the more capable I am of talking about this with myself and with other people, the further along I feel I get in terms of the journey I want to be on.
Yeah. And what is that journey? What is the journey that you want to be on?
Well, I think that, you know, I want to live the most authentic and real life that I can possibly live. I want to be myself in every important way that I can, not only for my benefit, but for the benefit of the people that are in my life. I want them, and they want to know an authentic me and not a guarded me. And I think that that's just a perspective that it's taken me, you know, 63 years to get to. And I'm still working, you know, in the very I suspect very early stages of that. I have a long way to go.
Yeah. Did any of the adoptees talk about things that had helped them process, come to terms with, or accept the pain and the trauma that they've been through?
Well, at the time that we did this project, which was, we did our filming about 10 years ago, the adoptee community had really grown up to the point that it is today. Now, that's not to say that the adoptee community is inclusive of even a majority of adoptees. I think that's not even close to being true. But many of the people that we talked to for Side by Side were very much a part of the community. Some were not. Some had never met another adoptee before they met me at the filming, or had a real conversation with an adoptee. And I think that the conclusion I would draw from all of that is that community and relationships with people who are adopted and who share our experiences is really important. It's really important in terms of the journey that we want to be on.
Yeah. I think the people say that the trauma specialists and the shrinks talk about the challenge, the challenge, or the fact that the trauma comes from broken relationships, and therefore the healing also happens in relationships. So it's all about the people that we are surround ourselves with.
And life is complicated. Nothing happens in a straight line. So healing certainly doesn't happen in a straight line.
How would you sum up what healing means to you? Is it that shift from being guarded to being more open to embracing the whole of your identity? Is there what those seem like quite rational kind of identity things to me? I'm wondering, has there been some shift in your feelings as well?
Well, first of all, my definition of healing and my version of healing in terms of the course of my life, particularly over the last 10 or 20 years, bears little resemblance, I think, to many adoptees' version of healing. And in fact, because our circumstances and our outcomes are so radically different and across such a broad spectrum, I think it's really hard to talk about what healing is.
It's got to be personal. So I guess what I'm asking is, what does healing mean to you?
Well, I think that's a lot of what we've been talking about today, at least when I've been talking about my own personal perspective, is the ability to be authentic and to live an authentic life is very much what healing is for me. It means I'm not guarded. It means I'm not presenting a false front. It means I'm being myself to those things, and I'm being honest to those things that are most intrinsically true about me, which are my race, my origins on the planet and in the world. I mean, if I can be honest and authentic about those things, and not attach those to the same level of shame and fear and alienation that I once felt, that's that's progress to me.
Yeah. So you said you felt it was different. Your experience, your healing has been different to the some of the conversations that you'd had for the project.
Well, certainly. I mean, once again, the project encompassed 100 stories, and so when you talk to 100 adoptees, you encounter every variety of outcome and circumstance that you could possibly imagine and beyond. And so you do encounter adoptees who have struggled in very, very important and tangible ways in life. They have struggled with, personal safety and health and housing and career and family, every manner of struggle, in those areas, just like in any microcosm of the world. So for it's impossible for me to sort of universally characterize the universe of adoptees that we spoke to for Side by Side. It really is. All I can say is, what are some of the biggest things that they wanted to talk about unprompted? And those things were certainly trauma and loss and racial identity.
Wow. So I'm coming up on time, Glenn. Is there anything that you'd like to share that I've not given you a chance to, that I've not asked questions about?
Well, I think the only thing that we haven't really talked about that the project does go into a fair amount is search for birth and biological parents and family, and reunion or the lack thereof, and the relationships involved in those or the lack thereof. So I think that those stories are even less universal than other aspects of the project, because search and reunion, there are as many different versions of that story as there are people you could talk to about it. But I do think that if I were involved in a search and or a reunion process, that I would have to believe that listening to some of these stories would be very, very helpful in coming up with good ways to think about those experiences in the past and what you're trying to achieve going forward. And I would really recommend that short of actually meeting in real life other adoptees and listening to them talk and having conversations about search and reunion, that this is a valuable tool, short of real life conversations.
Yeah. So you mentioned at the top that some of the videos have been grouped together thematically on the website. Is one of those themes around search and reunion?
Yes, there's a short film about the desire to search. There's a short film about reunion. There's a short film also about just trips to the motherland or Korea. And a lot of that is about search and reunion as well, because that's a lot of why people go. So, or at least that trip often sparks a desire to search or be reunited with biological family. So yeah, there are at least 3 films that go quite heavily into that subject.
Cool. So thank you very much for your time, Glenn, and thank you, listeners. And there's links, obviously, in the show notes to Glenn's the film project. And I forgot to mention earlier on, because you did this with your wife, yeah? This is with your wife.
Yes, my wife Julie and I we've been creative partners and filmmaking partners since the early 80s, and this is our most recent project.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Glenn, and thank you, listeners. We'll speak to you again very soon. Take care.
Thank you, Simon.